not gonna front. I just bought these two decks recently-ish. So I'm not gonna pretend that I know the cards by heart, but I'll know. Let's see. Something I've been thinking about recently, outside of change, is how we grow within those systems of change. It's like, oh, and one card just fell out. I guess I should read it. Oh, this is so scandalous. How am I going to show her? Discovery, unveiling, laying bare. And then underneath that, step by step toward the real you. So let me just start by actually just reading what's in the book, and then I'll tell you what was on my mind. So moving to explore the world in another person is first and foremost a move toward exploring yourself. Apply yourself to looking at and listening to all the expectations of your most authentic self. There will always be phases in which your being wants to grow, and the various stages in self-development will help you do this. This card speaks to both your psychological and sensual sides. Did I introduce this? This is the Love Me Oracle. Tell me you love me, Oracle. My bad. Highly recommend it for your own use. I love the artistry, and most of it I can't show because it's always nudie time. So I think the main thing here is something I've been talking about in my own work, and just something I've talked about with a lot of people recently in creative spaces is how we're defining who we fundamentally are. Something that I was talking about earlier today in the Creative Quest Club was about how we use terminology. And with my recent experience in serving on jury duty again, and just the technicalities of language, and feeling like, because throughout the whole jury duty experience, right, they're telling you to be honest. And I'm just like, even within that context, you can't necessarily be honest because y'all are using two different definitions for things. So where's the honesty? Where's the honesty in that? And, whose responsibility is it to be a translator? Is it on the person that is probably more aware that there are multiple definitions for a thing? So leveling the playing field would mean revealing which definition you use. That's also a technique that we used to use in debate. I used to be a varsity debater, policy in Lincoln Douglas. I was much better at policy. Where you kind of corner in the opponent by defining the terms, and if their terms and yours, you could essentially win a whole debate based off of a language technicality. And I think that sometimes that might be applied in situations where that isn't required. Like if a lawyer was looking for a juror, which they were, from the panel, maybe it's harsh for me to assume that the lawyers knew, but considering how much more experience they have in the courtroom versus people who are average Joes off the street, with the language of law, my perception is that responsibility weighs or skews more heavily to the lawyers who are part of that system. And the interesting thing is, when you're doing all the procedural stuff in jury duty, like, the orientation, the calling of the names, even when they butcher your name and you have to serve again because of something that you had no control over. True story. Don't worry. You're going to hear all about it in my creative outputs where it's healthiest. All of those items, even when you're in security, it's very clear. Things start getting muddled the deeper into the system you go. And sometimes that's accidental because of just how humans make things so complex by just existing. And also, let's be real, some people just make things complex because they just don't know how to sit still. But also, there are just some people who are meant to do that. They are meant to essentially tie the system in knots or test the system in ways that are, I guess, inconspicuous to the naked eye or the naked mind. Maybe not the naked mind, because that means it would just be raw, unprocessed power, computing power. But there are just some people who are there to make sure the system has extra gears so that it can potentially grind to a halt. You know, I'm not saying that's what those lawyers were doing. I'm just talking about how, in the scheme of things, we have to kind of determine those intentions through action more than thinking that we can rely upon all the terminologies and all the illusions that words provide. And so, in terms of all of the terms, authenticity, I mean, the fact that you even have to say it in any way other than defining the word itself means that you probably shouldn't use it. You should show it, because that's what authenticity is. And so, you know, it had me thinking about my own projects and how I wanted, not just needed, because I've been needing to do a lot of things for a long time, but how I desired to express myself more fully, but like in this self nourishing way. Because regardless of if anyone sees what I do or not, it's gonna get done. I was talking to someone earlier today about how people use the word dream. If we're thinking about more of this contextual inquiry that I'm doing right now with language and terms, and in some sense, people might use the word dream as output, or dream as something that is aspirational, or dream as something that doesn't necessarily have to have a purpose at all. So it's like, what instance are we using for dream in the whole parent system of dreams? And I think that's a really good question. I think that depends on the person, right? Um, for me, I am always living inside a dream. I dream my dreams into reality. That is how it works for me. That is what my imagination is there for. That is why my head is always in the clouds, because whatever I get from the clouds, guess what you get from clouds sometimes? And oftentimes you see a lot of the beautiful creativity um, that's just locked up in not even some other person's dream. Well, maybe it is. Like, even Scrooge McDuck had a dream, right? But you see a lot of people's dreams, they put those off or they hide under other people's dreams. And who am I to say that that isn't right? You can learn a lot by building other people's dreams. But what does it take to build your own dream? What is it look like in reality? What does that system look like? How can you make more of the imagination that exists within your mind and your mind's eye and have that in the material plane? And it doesn't have to be anything like extravagant. Perhaps it's not necessarily in the 3D, but maybe in the 4D, the internet, right? Or maybe it's within your own practice, like if you're in the 5D or whatever dimension you want to float in at any given time. It's the how do you express the multidimensionality? Do you express the multidimensionality of your dreams? What does it look like? Does it look like a T-Rex? Does it sag like a heavy load? Does it explode? What does it smell like? Taste like? You know, I think that's the thing when I'm thinking about this card, unveiling, laying bare. I think that's what it is. How can you, for me, this is what I'm asking myself, how can you create a structure that allows you to essentially just like, it's not even a structure, but like, yeah, a structure, container, incubator, a temporary incubator. And that's what an incubator is, right? How can you create this like moving experience that allows you to create within it, and then once you get to a particular point where those creations can stand on their own, release them, just let them go. That's what Project Build is. Build until I love deeply, then let it go. That brings me to the Change Tarot. Yay! I am a horrible shuffler. Also, I'm on the couch. So we're going to see how this goes. I'm going to shuffle on my knee. Ah! I saw how it went. I like trying new non Freddy Krueger psychological things. And so that's a part of the reason why I do what I do. But guess what? I don't need fancy Italian card games to do what I do. I can just do that on anything. Don't you do that with chess and checkers and any other game? Just mapping things out with roles and things we play. This is the Queen of Cups. Oh, how emotional is our darling? Let's see. It doesn't always have to be emotion with the Queen of Cups. I feel like all of them get such a bad rep sometimes. A court. A queen in a court. She's sitting there. And one of the things she has is this humongous goblet in this one. And you know what this reminds me of? What is that Rihanna song? All I see is signs. All I see is dollar signs. Why can't I think of the name of the song? And I listen to it all the time. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. One of the interesting things in here is what you think is the sea is actually her dress and the train extending out from it. Her emotions are her royalty. Free flowing. For the psychological bent, deep listening is a primary task in all healing relationships. It is easy to project fantasies about who another person is or ought to be rather than pause and cultivate the willingness to be present with who another is and what they're offering. That sounds like a long-winded sentence. Opening ourselves up to hearing the reality of where others are and what they have to share can be pretty painful and terrifying. Perhaps this is why philosopher Simone Weil has written that the capacity to give one's attention to a sufferer is a very rare and difficult thing. It is almost a miracle. It is a miracle. The Queen of Cups holds a large chalice, perhaps symbolizing the emotional matters of others, which she holds lightly and with deep care. She is an image of what's called exquisite empathy, defined by Richard Lawrence Harrison as highly present, sensitively attuned, well boundaried, heartfelt, empathetic engagement. Academics, please get your life together because, like, there's really no need. Like, I like words too. This sort of empathy may be what makes it possible to listen deeply rather than consistently deny, overlook, and avoid our own truths and the truths of others. Here, here. As I said before, that was a lot just to say, look at this damn card. And she is the queen of her emotions. She wears them all on her body. She got emotions in her cup. She probably going to drink them too. And also, she has a whole bunch of little sea children here. So that's what she's pouring things out into. She rules the sea children as well. And she's also not nude on this card, so I could show it as many times as I want. But what I take from that, and also just generally speaking, the many interpretations of the Queen of Cups, is stop avoiding your feelings on how you are going to communicate with people. It's essentially what Erykah Badu said. I'm an artist and I'm sensitive about my shit. And sometimes I think this kind of addresses a little bit of the shadow side of the Queen of Cups though, where sometimes she gets so much in her emotions that they just like take over the whole experience, because now everything is centered around her own perception of things and not necessarily what is actually happening. If you actually look at what is actually happening, are you safe? Is anyone currently threatening you right now? What is the next best step you could take? What feels like a good step in the direction that feels good for you? When you take that next step, who's going to meet you there? You're going to meet yourself there? Do you need someone else to meet you there? What's that like? It doesn't necessarily have to be that methodical, but sometimes I just lean on the practical, because oftentimes when people talk, sometimes people will talk about like emotions as if there's no practicality in them. And then they'll talk about practical things as if like people aren't driven by their emotions, and then retrofitting some sort of introspective technique later on. It's like when people complain about people who do therapy talk. It's like, well, I did this. It's like, or you could have done something else, or you could have done it just because you did it. So, I just try to do a little bit of Lego and make things practical for those who are possibly like me, builders. So going back to the shadow aspect for my own work, Project Build. In many ways, I feel like because I took a break from writing to kind of really sit down and think about Project Build, there were a lot of realizations and cancellations and all this stuff happening for me, where I had to think about how I could create a container that can't be destroyed by bullshit. I had to really sit there and think about, actually, it was something very small. My Ableton license that I so generously had for longer than I thought I would. It just, got revoked, rightfully so, because I had it for 2 more months, and I was doing it. I was mixing and everything. Oh man, I love session view. I know it confuses a lot of people, but like session view works for my brain. Um, and also the way I like to compose music. But at least right now, I really had to think about learning again when I had just come off of a learning cycle. And I was like, oh no, I need to learn something else. Sure, I could have invested in continuing the license in some way, but I really wanted to sit down and think about what was the most sustainable thing for me. And it wasn't necessarily paying for um, something that I couldn't really own like that. All the sounds in the library, the files that you use and you are no longer able to export. It's like all of that is theirs for you to use. You don't own that. Remember when most people thought they could own your ebooks, your music, all these digital things that are on borrowed schedules. So I wanted to continue because I've been exploring digital sovereignty. I wanted to continue exploring digital sovereignty the way I wanted to. And that meant putting it a part of my ecosystem for creativity where I want to cut down on the amount of distractions I have when I create. That's in every aspect of my life. That's what Project Build is. It allows me to focus on what I need to focus on so that I can pour all of my energy into it and then just release it. That's how I want to feel versus having this just diluted energy that I'm like, all right, I'm gonna do this because I'm now scheduled for this amount of output. It's not about time. It's about what you're putting into it. Are you putting all your love into it, or are you like, or you can only half-ass it? I know people like to talk about like perfectionism and stuff like that, and yeah, I probably have it, but also it's about care for me. That's how I see it. It's just because I can feel the energy within myself when I do things. I can tell when I don't want to do something and I'm forcing myself to do it, and I can tell when I'm just going for it, whatever it is, even if the end result looks like an episode of Nailed It, and I don't even know if that show is still on because I don't watch TV. But why? My opinions are also formed by the fact that I have constant reminders that life is so short. Why phone it in? Through all the ups and downs, aches and pains, burns and bruises that I've experienced, that just makes me go into it more because it reminds me when this is it, this is it. You don't want to regret anything. I've never lived a life where I regret anything. That says a lot because I've been through a lot. But all of those experiences made me what I am right now. That allow me to pour my energy into things and also just remove things from my life that actually provide no value to my creative ecosystem. That's what I want to say. That's the vulnerability it requires to create an ecosystem that allows you to continue contributing and pouring gifts out into the universe. So, if that's the part of me that I discover as I develop this thing, then good. Yeah. Interestingly enough, I didn't think that this reflection time would go like this at all. I honestly had maybe half of a hunch of me talking about my projects, but I also didn't realize that I was circling so many different ideas at the same time that really touch on things from different perspectives. And I think it could feel like that scene from Alice in Wonderland with the caucus race sometimes, where it's just like, why are we running? And then the water is splashing on us. We're about to drown. Like, there's just too much going on. That's honestly how it's felt. Granted, I'm at a space right now where the too much going on is all good. Whew, I almost said hallelujah. The too much going on, that's not to say that, I recently lost a family member. So it's not to say that these things, everything is all good, everything is all fine and dandy. But in terms of the feeling of calm, I'm hearing peace, but it's more than that. The feeling of emotional stability and balance that also translates itself to my nervous system. It took a long time to get here because I'm going to need it when I put these projects out.